the audience is invisible.
Right.
It looks like we are now streaming on YouTube. So hello everybody and welcome to another career chat in our series. My name is Anna Villani. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm going to be facilitating our talk today. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll be able to relay those to our guest today. Our highlighted guest whose career we're going to be talking about is Julian Siggers, who is the president and CEO of the museum. Hello.
Hey, Anna, how are you?
So good, so excited to be here today. So to get started, could you tell us a little bit about what is your role? What do you do in the museum?
As the president and the CEO, I am sort of responsible for running the whole museum, which is the most fantastic job you could ever have. With our 40 million or so objects and specimens, and a huge group of scientists and educators. And people who look after the collections, and of course our exhibitions team. So I get to run this incredible public-facing, but also research institution, and it's sort of, I can't think of any job I prefer to.
Yeah, it is really cool. I don't think everybody knows that the museum kind of has two sides. There's all the exhibits that you see when you're visiting as a guest, but there's also a huge collection behind the scenes. It's like a library full of objects, artifacts, animals, plants, rocks that people come from all over the world to study, which is super cool. So, and your background is archaeology, is that right, Julian?
Yeah, so I started off as an archaeologist in the UK, and I grew up in the south of England, where it's known for its archaeology around there. There are loads of archaeological sites all over the countryside there. And very close to where I lived was a very famous archaeology site called Stonehenge. So I started.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's amazing. I started excavating very, very early. I was 13. And there was at the school I went to, there was an archaeology club, and we would go to local digs and work there. I mean, to be honest, they didn't allow us to do anything particularly sensitive, and we did a lot of moving earth with wheelbarrows, but you do get to excavate a bit, and I just sort of fell in love with that archaeology, and then went on to study that at university, and then went on to excavate in the UK and in Israel and Jordan and Syria. So it's a life full of adventure, and I recommend it highly. But I've always been interested in museums. I just always loved natural history museums. When I was a kid, my favorite was the Natural History Museum in London. But the field has always had a sort of special place for me because it's such a remarkable place.
That's so cool. And I feel like a lot of people, can you talk a little bit about what is the definition of archaeology? Because I think between Indiana Jones, that is where a lot of people's framework is, and there's a lot of confusion sometimes with paleontology, but people do usually know that it's digging. And so it's cool
Right.
that you started digging from such a young age.
So archaeology is the study of who we are and where we came from. And unlike historians that look at written texts, archaeologists excavate sites where people used to live in the past and interpret them. Basically, they treat every site it's like almost like a crime scene. So you're trying to piece together from what people have left behind, what they were doing there. So that could be like a really ancient village, or a fortress, or burials, or perhaps a very early farm, and it's really, really interesting work. But often you have no written records to go on usually, so it's all on you to try and understand and interpret how humans behaved and how they changed over time.
That is so cool. It's like looking at all the clues of the past.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing. So how did you go from doing archaeology to museum leadership?
Well, so archaeologists often work in museums because that's where all the collections are. So, I mean, I worked in museums since I was sort of an undergraduate. And so I love them. But my real epiphany for museums came when I realized how many people museums can reach. I mean, you can, through exhibitions and through programming, reach, millions of people with what museums do, and you can sort of share your passion with them. So that to me was like, what a great way to spend your life. And I first worked in museums when I was a grad student, and the museum I worked at was the Royal Ontario Museum in Canada, and it had a summer camp where kids can come for these 2-week classes on like learn to become an archaeologist, learn to be, look at dinosaurs, be a paleontologist. And I taught kids, and I just really loved it. And so after that, I sort of moved into museums and just sort of went my way up the ladder there and got into museum administration and realized I really loved that, setting the course that museums go. And so that's how I got into that. I started off in Canada, and then I moved to the Science Museum in London, and then back to the Royal Ontario Museum. And then I went to be the director of the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology, which is this amazing archaeology museum. And then when I was there for about 8 years, and when the CEO position came up at the field, of course, I absolutely jumped at it. And I've been here for about 7 months now.
Yeah. And 7 months of like interestingness, because it's hard to go in the museum in person, but soon you'll be.
Very interesting time to sort of take over as a huge institution, because we've been open and we've been closed, and but we've been open actually since January, and of course now we're welcoming people in. We're thrilled to have you all come and visit us, and I think as of next week we can have up to 60% capacity there, which is very exciting for us because we as museum people, we live for the visitors. We really do. That's what we really love doing, is interacting with you and sharing the passion of what we all do.
Yeah, and kind of on that note, one of the questions from Fall Creek Intermediate School is, what's your favorite part of your job?
My favorite part of my job is working out where the museum is going to go. What are our new priorities going to be? But I have to admit, nothing gives me as much pleasure is taking somebody around the museum. And just answering their questions, seeing them become interested in what you do. I love that interaction with the public, and I love sort of getting people interested in the mission of the museum too. And that's everyone from school kids who want to be scientists to some of the families and all of our members, really.
Yeah, that is really awesome. And we just had another question come in. Can you talk more about how you got started in archaeology?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in the sort of the life of an archaeologist, and I used to really drive my parents crazy because I'd dig up the garden. And being from England's such an old country that if you dig anywhere, you're going to find things. So I was finding usually sort of 19th century bottles and bits of ceramic and stuff like that. But I really loved it. I also loved the sort of the detective work that's involved with it. Piecing together the past from these very fragmentary objects. I loved that. And I love the travel. I worked out that I've spent about 2.5 years living in tents, of which I'm now a little tired of. But so, because you're usually in fairly remote places, you can be. It's a great life, and I've got to travel all over the world as an archaeologist, and as I say, I recommend it wholeheartedly.
That's so cool. And Tanner wanted to know, what is your best memory from doing archaeology?
Oh, well, I once worked on a site called Boxgrove, and Boxgrove is in southern England, and it was a freak discovery, really, because it was discovered in a quarry, And what it was it was the earliest site that humans came to Britain. So it was 500,000 years old. And it was the old beach of England, essentially, the south coast. And prehistoric people who were actually not even modern Homo sapiens sapiens yet, they were called Homo heidelbergensis, so they were our ancestors, used to make chipstone tools there. And so you were excavating where they actually were, because the sediments had sealed them up very quickly. And so finding a stone axe called a hand axe that was 500,000 years old, and you're gradually scraping away, and it suddenly you see the top of it, and then the whole thing slowly gets revealed to you, and you go like, wow, that's 500,000 years old. And the animals that we found around it, where many of them were, you know, not animals you'd think of when you think of like England. There were things like woolly rhinos and these big sort of wolves. And so it was really amazing to have all these extinct animals around as well. So that's my favorite one. I worked for a long time in the Middle East too, and particularly in Jordan. And I excavated many of the first villages that people ever lived in. And that was very exciting work as well.
That is really cool. And this might kind of overlap with that hand axe you were talking about. Owen wanted to know, what is your favorite item that you have ever found?
I found quite a few things I really liked. One was this is a really interesting one here. So I don't know if you can see this. So this is made out of chipped stone, and stone called flint. And what it is about 4,500 years old, and it's the first axes that humans would make, and they would use them to sort of clear the forest. So I've always loved stone tools because for most of our history, you know, we didn't have metals like bronze and iron and steel. We used to make all of our tools out of stone, and so there are lots of them lying around to be found. So I've always loved stone tools, and those have been my favorite art artifacts. And there are lots of them in the field. There's a set of what are called fulsome points and clovic points. So these little spearheads that are about this big, made out of chipped stone. And the first peoples who lived in North America made them. And they used to use them to hunt woolly mammoths and mastodons. And so we have a huge display of those in the field as well, in the Ancient Americas Gallery.
That is really cool. And I don't know if this is also going to be Ancient Americas, but Braden wants to know, what is your favorite exhibit at the museum?
Oh, that's a hard question to ask the CEO, right? So I mean, I like many of them. I love the Ancient Americas. Actually, I think that's so interesting, seeing all of these ancient cultures, and it's room after room of the most amazing artifacts. But I tell you, one of the ones that surprised me that I really love, and that is the dioramas. The dioramas are, I mean, some of those dioramas are, 80, 90, 100 years old. And I think they're the finest dioramas I've ever seen anywhere. The artistry in them, they're just remarkable. So I love those. Obviously, Sue has become a quick favorite of mine. I'm not a paleontologist, but I love paleontology. And I think what the field has done with its paleontology galleries is just incredible too.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I'm a big fan of the dioramas as well. It's old school virtual reality, and it's so cool to be immersed in that way through all those really cool specimens. This is an interesting question. How many animals and stuff from historical places have you found? That's from KJ.
Maybe the animals. I think quite a few. The thing about animal bones is they're organic, so they decay reasonably quickly. And so you don't, it depends on the soil that you're digging. Sometimes if the soil is, quite acidic, the bones decay very fast and you don't find them. But in very dry environments, sometimes you can find them too. So one of the coolest animals I found was an extinct cave bear, and it was huge, and it was just one tooth. But these were like bigger than a Kodiak or something. They were huge, so that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. And Isaac wants to know, what is the craziest thing you have ever found?
The craziest thing. I tell you, the most disappointing thing I ever found is I was in this cave, and there was tons of prehistoric settlement all around. And I thought, well, this cave has got to be a great place to, I bet you prehistoric people lived here. And I was working, and I had a couple of students working with me, and we dug this big trench. And you dig very slowly with archaeology because you record everything as you go down, every time the soil changes. And then we've been working there for a couple of weeks, and we've gone down about 5 feet, and I found a cigarette package. So it meant that the whole site was disturbed and wasn't ancient at all. And so that was crazy annoying. Anyway, so.
Yeah, that is such a disappointment. It's going to be full of cool things. You're like, oh no, this is recent. So sad. Where would you say your favorite dig site is? KJ wants to know.
I think that some of my favorite archaeological sites are actually not places I've actually personally worked, but I've visited. So the archaeological sites in Egypt are phenomenal. And so I had in my previous job, they had many archaeologists who worked in Egypt. And so I went to visit their excavations, and it was amazing. And my favorite site was two of the Egyptologists had found an unknown pharaoh's tomb in a place called Abydos in Egypt. And they took me to see the tomb, and it was this tunnel that was carved into the rock. And they had lights that they'd strung up all over. And so you went down about 50 meters into the heart of this cliff face. And sometimes you had to crawl. And it was incredibly hot as well. I mean, I was sweating profusely. And at the very end, it opened up. But before you got there, there was a sort of parts of the tunnel where there would just be a hole. And the Egyptologist, I said to the Egyptologist, how deep is that? And he says, throw a pebble down. And I did. And I never heard it hit the bottom. I mean, maybe it hit sand. But then you kept going, and then you found the actual pharaoh's tomb, which had been robbed in antiquity. So the tomb was about 3,000 years old or something. But all that was left was the sarcophagus, which is the stone coffin of the pharaoh. And the pharaoh himself was still there. But all of the objects that were there had been taken by tomb robbers, probably not long after he was interred into there. But that was really, really exciting. Bit unnerving, but exciting.
Yeah, that's like wild to be like crawling through tight.
Yeah.
Feels like quite an adventure.
If you imagine what the tomb robbers, it must have been like, because we had electric lights going all the way down the tunnel. When they robbed it thousands of years ago, they would have just had, open flame on a torch, and that would be really scary.
That's true. Whole other level. Owen wants to know, have you ever dug up a jewel or a diamond?
I once, when I was excavating in London, and London used to be a Roman city as well. I once excavated a ring, which was a Roman ring, which was quite nice. I think it had a cut stone in it. It wasn't super valuable, but it was, it was pretty nice, and it was made of gold. I apologize, that's my dog getting excited about stuff. but that was the nearest to jewelry I've had. You also excavate many beads as well. The string is usually gone, and so you just find a pile of them.
That's cool. Are they like glass and ceramic, or like?
The glass and ceramic. The earliest ones are usually made from seashells.
Oh, cool.
And they've just drilled a hole in them and they've strung them together. And then we've been doing that since, since Homo sapiens came around, so a long time.
Yeah. Oh, I think this is a good one. A good question about like archaeology work. Do you work on a team when you are on a dig, or do you go solo?
You usually work on a team, and so it's you have a lot of scientists who are with you, who specialize in various things. And so as an archaeologist, you can specialize right down. So there are some people who are interested in ancient plants, and some people are interested in ancient animals, and some people are interested in ancient human remains as well. And then some people are interested in technology and in architecture. And so usually you bring all these people together, and then you excavate together as a team of sort of specialists. And they're usually, students who are learning how to be an archaeologist too, and grad students as well. And often they have a lot of local volunteers as well, help you as well.
It's really nice to work with like the local people.
Absolutely.
Do you still get to dig outside? That's another question we have.
That's a very good question. Now, as you can imagine, when you start running museums, you very infrequently get a chance to go and do your own work because they're large, complex organizations. So I haven't had a chance to excavate for quite a while. But what I do have is a chance to go and visit all my colleagues. And so I'm really looking forward to doing that at the field, because we have scientists who work all over the world at the field. So I'm looking forward to going and visiting their excavations, and also looking at the other scientists too. I'm looking forward to going to the Amazon, where we have a lot of work going on, a lot of conservation work. So that'll be exciting too. But unfortunately, I'm sort of pretty much chained to my desk most of the time.
Yeah. What would you say that a regular day at work looks like for you?
Well, it's very varied, but so basically right now, most of it's all being done by Zoom, but I could have a meeting where we're discussing, when is the museum reopening? Then that would be followed by a meeting of like, here's the new exhibition that's coming on. Then it would be perhaps like with some of the teachers to find out, what's going on over there. And then it could be, there can be meetings about the building, and planning for the future. What other projects are we going to do? So it's one of the great things is it's very, very varied work as well.
Yeah, there's so much different stuff, like many different content areas, many different fields of research, many different exhibits. So
Sure.
Something new. This is a question from Miles, who wants to know, did you always want to be a museum owner?
Well, I don't own it, Miles, but I always wanted to be a museum director, I think. I always liked the idea of that. The people who own the museum are you. I mean, we're here, we're a not-for-profit to be in service of for you guys. And so we do have a board who are wonderful supporters of this museum. But yeah, I've always wanted to do this job, I have to say.
Wonderful. And this is a fun question from Wendy. So when did you first move to the United States, and what do you find to be some funny or interesting differences between the different cultures where you've lived?
Yeah, so I first moved to the United States in 2012. And I moved I was in the UK, then I spent quite a lot of time at the Royal Ontario Museum in Canada. And, I mean, there are a lot of similarities between Canada and the US. But when I came, I mean, I realized they're also quite different. So I actually love living here. I just find Americans incredibly warm and generous. So I thoroughly enjoy living in the States. I mean, to me, what was the biggest surprise about the States is just the size of it, you know, and and its difference. You know, there are so many different sort of ecosystems here alone. I mean, everything from Alaska to Florida and everything in between, right? It's an incredibly large and fascinating country.
It is. It's like, it is amazing how many different types of, environments, from, the Everglades to
Yeah.
national park and everything in between.
Yeah.
Really
My
extreme.
biggest surprise was food portions.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe the amount of food you get, and I'm not complaining, but it was it was quite different from where else I've been.
We do have a lot of food. There was a question that was submitted in advance from Fall Creek Intermediate. What type of rocks have you seen?
Well, archaeologists see all sorts of rocks, right? They see rocks, as I showed you sort of earlier, that have been made into things, and they also are actually having to excavate sort of in and around rocks all the time. So everything from metamorphic and igneous and sedimentary, I've sort of seen them all. But I mean, my particular interest is rocks that you can make things from. And I actually make my own stone tools at home, sort of arrowheads and axes and stuff like that. And so you have to have quite a lot of rock to make something small, because you're chipping away at it. And my wife has actually just banned me from doing that inside, because they fly.
That is really fun. What do you use to make stone tools?
Well, usually what you do is you have say a rock like this would have probably been a block of rock about that big. And then you use another pebble to take chips off it. And sometimes when you get near the end, you can use a piece of antler, because that takes longer, thinner chips off it. And so those are the two basic tools you use. It's like another rock and a piece of antler.
That is so cool. I didn't realize you used antlers in like making stone tools. That is wild. And this, I think, is a relevant question. What do you do with the things that you dig up?
That's a very good question. It depends where you are. So these days, if you're in another country, all of the objects that you find usually go to that country's government. So that means they usually go to the museums that are in that country. Most of it either goes to government storage areas where the scientists can look at them, or they go to museums where they can either be put on display, or people can come and do research and look at them within the museum too.
That is really cool. That belongs in a museum, to quote Indiana Jones. And so it looks like we're kind of getting towards the end of the time. So this might be our last question. What advice would you give to students who are interested in science, social science, archaeology, museum careers?
My best advice would be to volunteer. To volunteer at museums, and you can do that at quite a young age, and also to sort of to volunteer on the type of science that you're really interested in, because there's so much stuff you can do on your own. I mean, there's so much stuff you can just read about, and I always say, like, get out into nature, and you can teach yourself quite a lot of this before you actually go into any formal instructions, and volunteer. You'll have a lot of fun. You'll be exposed to people who like the same things that you do as well, and you'll be surprised at the welcome you will receive.
That is a really awesome tip. And I know I started volunteering in museums in like education capacity really early on, which is a great way to get introduced to something and see if you really like it. And then you can just keep doing it and building up experience. So that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today, Julian. It
was my absolute pleasure.
If I ever need to make stone tools, I know who to talk to.
Yeah, cool.
Well, thank you everyone for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll see you again on this channel for more career chats with Field Museum staff. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.